Sam's journey just isn't emotional, it's intellectual, and now the conversation pivots. This next moment marks the transition from values to voltage, from personal grounding to the physical system that powers our lives. Because behind every EV battery and every grid update, there is a set of trade-offs and a deep well of design decisions most people never see. Let's nerd out. If you don't mind, I have to nerd out with you for a minute about battery tech, okay? So what are some of the most exciting battery chemistries being explored right now?
Battery technology, it's incredible what's happening. There's going to be an explosion, isn't there, of the next 10 years. It's going to be absolutely insane. And which ones will win, which ones won't, it's going to be fascinating. What are you looking at?
I live in Michigan, which is a cold climate. And what's really taking my interest are batteries that are going to work with me in the minus 20 degree Fahrenheit zones that I like to go to. And so the combination of these hybrid battery techs where there's, a little bit of traditional lithium and then some other ones that handle that cold better. And then even the blade batteries that are out there, the energy density, the rapidly charging ones that kind of have more.
Yep. When you say blade batteries, I think people need to recognize the fact that it's not just BYD that makes blade batteries. It's their marketing terminology, the word blade, but the reality is that there's now numerous manufacturers that make thin blade batteries, essentially, that you could call a blade battery, which are probably technologically more advanced than BYD's blade battery, or at least their existing battery used in 99% of their cars. Now, of course, the new blade battery is a different story. It's much more technologically advanced, but there's two different ones. I'm sure you're aware of this. There's the higher energy density blade battery, which is not yet in any BYD cars, and it's meant to be coming. And then there's the existing new blade battery in the BYD Tang and the BYD Han. And that has an energy density, I think, approximately about 185 watt hours per kilogram, a bit under rivals like Geely at 192 watt hours per kilogram. And then, of course, you've got lithium iron phosphate batteries from CATL that are at about 205 watt hours per kilogram. But the key difference, of course, is with that blade battery from BYD in the Tang and the Han, can charge at 1000 kilowatt. And I think they've enabled that by cutting the battery in half, which is what Geely have done with their golden blade battery. So the golden brick battery, whatever you want to call it, their golden battery, that is half the length of a BYD blade battery. So they're kind of like short blade batteries. And that's kind of the uncomplicated way to explain that that's the fast charging version of the blade battery. Shortening the battery, they can increase the charging speed significantly.
Less surface area to cover to push the same amount of charge, just more small pockets. Yeah. When we talk about batteries, we usually talk about range, but what I'm really asking here is about potential, because the moment you increase power density, when you pack more capabilities into less space, you don't just change how far something can go, you change what becomes possible. This is where chemistry meets creativity and where design stops being about limits and starts being about leverage. So how does the increase of power density change what's possible in EV designs?
Increase in energy density changes what's possible for a number of reasons. One really exciting reason is sports cars will be lighter. You can now look at that Chinese electric car, sports car. It's the company that's building it, I believe they're primarily owned by Xiaomi. So it's basically a Xiaomi sports car. It's similar size to, say, something like a Porsche 911, but it weighs 1,250 kilograms, which is lighter than a Porsche 911, lighter than a Lamborghini 296 GTB, lighter than a Lamborghini Huracan, and yet it does have good range. It's got range of, I believe, about 500 kilometers. So the high energy density in these batteries means you can put a smaller battery in, and eventually, when we see these energy densities, like CATL's new battery tech, they're saying the new condensed battery version 2 is going to be 450 watt hours per kilogram. Then they've got another battery they're working on that's going to be 500 watt hours. You're going to see battery packs going to be much smaller. You can be able to put in a 30 kilowatt hour battery in a sports car or a normal car. You're going to find EVs will be much lighter within 10 years than internal combustion. Now people say they're heavier, which is not always true. The Model 3 is not heavier than Mercedes-Benz C-Class, which is the same size. But a lot of EVs are heavier. But in the future, they won't be. They'll actually be much lighter. Solid state batteries, when we're getting this energy density of, plus 1,000 watt hours per kilogram, which is going to happen eventually, you can put maybe a 20, 30 kilowatt hour battery in a family car. That's what eventually will happen. And the car will be incredibly lightweight. Look at these little in-hub motors that are like 20 kilograms, putting out 600 plus horsepower. So I think the combination is going to be just The design, like think about an engine, right? General Motors, right? They tried to make the new Corvette, and they're like, well, we've got to put the engine mid-engine. We've got to make it a mid-engine car because we have these problems with putting it in a front-engine supercar. So they make it a mid-engine car. It's an absolute nightmare to do it. You got to think about all the trade-offs. Where should it go? Handling balance, get 50-50 weight distribution. Really, really hard to do with an EV. 50-50 weight distribution is a piece of piss. It is so easy. So it's going to be in any kind of car you can imagine. There's no constraint. The battery will be quite small. The motors will be tiny. You do whatever you want. You can build any kind of car you want. It's going to be, the world is going to look like crazy. It's going to be crazy looking cars. There's going to be, people are going to hand make their own cars. It's much easier to do. Getting these skateboards off Cadel, they just buy a skateboard and bang, you just put on every car you want on top of it. So I think this increase in energy density will do a few things. Change the form of cars. It enables whatever form you want. Change the weight of cars. Cars will be much lighter. But even more than that, it'll mean if you want to tow your motorhome, and in the US, you guys have some insanely large motorhomes. It's unlike any other country in the world. Maybe Canada's the same, I'm not sure. But it'll enable that. You're going to be looking at, what's the most range you get right now? 450 miles of range from the Chevy Silverado EV. You're going to have 1,000 plus miles of range. And that's the point where I think there won't be any range constraints whatsoever. You'll be able to get the range you want, just depending on what your needs are.
We tend to talk about batteries as if they're a standalone tech, but they're really not. They're part of an ecosystem: roads, charging station, consumer habits, infrastructure designs. In this next segment, Sam and I explore how battery performance isn't just about chemistry, it's about context, how fast you can charge, where you can plug in, what behaviors people adopt or abandon because of a few minutes gained or lost at a charging station. It's not just about building better batteries, it's about designing a system people can trust.
Yeah.
Right, and for somebody in a cold climate where range decreases with temperature, that is incredibly important to us.
But Cadel's new before the new sodium lithium hybrid battery, that loses only 4% of range at minus 20 degrees.
Nice.
So a lot of these new batteries, they are advertising a big part of the advantages of them. They're good for North America, particularly. Australia, it's irrelevant, but North America, cold climate, their ability to handle freezing temperatures is completely different. So there's about 4 or 5 different battery chemistries from the big Chinese players now that are LFP that can handle these freezing temperatures and not lose only a very small amount of range, very, very small amount. And they've really worked on that. So that's a big advantage for you guys. Yeah.
One of the reasons why I'm super excited about EV and EV tech is early on in my career, I used to design specialty service tools. When you'd go to a dealership or there'd be a recall, I'd be the guy designing the tools to fix the cars. And when I look at some of these new designs, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so simple. Like there's a lot less complicated kind of tools needed to service that, except for like the high voltage stuff maybe, right? Everything else is just kind of plug, play, wires, and suspension. And it makes life just so much easier. So it makes me very, very excited. Looking ahead 10 years, what do you think battery tech will actually look like and how it will actually reshape the industry?
Yeah, I think that hybrids, I did a video recently on the demise of hybrids. I believe it'll be like Norway, where people just think a hybrid is like an internal combustion car and there's no real, they'll occupy a very small part of the market, I believe, because range will be significantly greater. We'll have, looking at, if you want to get a long range car, say a 600 plus miles of range, there won't be that cost constraint where you're looking at and saying, well, the battery's going to be too big, I can't afford it. So the big change will be, I think, range improvements and charging speed improvements. Like you said before, that new Blade battery can charge from, I think it was 10, around about, depending on the battery size, 10 to 80% in about 5, 6, 7 minutes. Obviously, there's other chemistries, other batteries now that can do that as well. The ALB, their battery in all the X-Pen cars, that's 12 minutes every model. Then, of course, you've got Zeekr. They can do it in 8 minutes. So that's what we're going to see. Charging speed, people won't really think about it so much. Now they think, oh, I've got to stop and charge and how long I'm going to wait. But I don't think that's going to be a factor anymore. There'll be a lot of DC fast charging stations and cars will charge so quickly, we won't really worry about that. The other thing I see happening is just, like I said before, I think the market will see no reason to purchase a petrol, a hybrid is a plug-in hybrid or an EREV. It's still ultimately a petrol vehicle or gasoline-powered vehicle. And I think that the vehicles that will be left that will be hybrid, there will be some, potentially a small number but they'll be e-revs. I don't think they'll be plug-in hybrids or hybrids. I think they'll just be e-revs. So they're not a small generator, potentially a 1 litre, 3-cylinder, 2-cylinder, very, very small generator, which will simply power your electric car, which is what we're seeing in China now. Geely is bringing them out. I think they're a much better solution. And obviously, Ram have been working on theirs with their new electric pickup truck. That could occupy a very small part of the market. But the rest of the market, I think we're looking at the base of the market will be sodium batteries. In the cheapest, most affordable car will be sodium.
By now the patterns are clear. When charging becomes easier, people drive differently. When batteries last longer, infrastructure expectations shift. And when customers feel confident, the industry accelerates. This next exchange is about more than specs. It's about psychology. What happens when people stop worrying about where to plug in and start thinking differently about what they drive, where they live, and how they plan? Design isn't shaping the battery, it's reshaping behavior. Sodium chemistry, can you just give just a little why it's so exciting in terms of just resource low?
Sure. Right now, the cost for lithium iron phosphate batteries, which are the cheapest batteries in the world, is around $55 per kilowatt hour at the cell level, not the pack level. That's the cell level. They're saying that sodium will drop the price to approximately $10 per kilowatt hour. Meaning you could not manufacture in any country in the world an internal combustion car that would compete on price, even remotely. You couldn't. Mm-hmm. The cost difference would be like an engine might cost you, say, $3,000 or $4,000 to manufacture. The battery pack in your sodium-powered car might cost you $400. So the difference would be astronomical, and that's why Tony Seba is predicting $5,000 EVs, primarily for that reason. Of course, we can't guarantee that's going to happen, but it probably will, considering the CATL, the biggest battery company in the world, they have a market. They're basically a monopoly, as the Chinese government have said. They've begun building their mega sodium-ion battery factory, and they've also, very importantly, improved the energy density. The energy density wasn't good enough a couple of years ago, maybe even a year ago. But within the last 6 months, we've seen the energy densities increase from about 120, 130, 140 watt-hours per kilogram up to about 170. So now it's not far behind lithium iron phosphate. And then we're talking early generation. If you ask artificial intelligence about this and you really get to look at all the parameters, and it's 50 steps ahead of us in a chess game, it's predicting that sodium-ion batteries will take up a huge percentage of the market for the reasons we've said. It's early in the game. Hydrogen, lithium batteries, we've been decades of development. Sodium, it's only been a few years, and we're already at this point. So considering the abundance of sodium, it's one of the most abundant materials on the face of the planet, very, very, very cheap. And the fact that sodium-ion batteries do have some advantages in terms of what you said before, their ability to handle cold temperatures. So that'll be the cheap section of the market, right? I still think lithium iron phosphate will be around the middle section. And then I think what you guys are doing, Factorial and some other companies in the United States, will be able to occupy that premium level with solid state batteries. You're looking at Lucid Air type cars, maybe the new Model S, maybe potentially Lamborghini Huracan, these sorts of cars will have these solid state batteries, and they'll be putting out massive amounts of immediate power and immediate, performance.
At this point, Sam questions whether hyper-efficient vehicles like Aptera are even necessary. In a world with abundant electricity, this is a fair question, and one that reveals a deeper misunderstanding of design intent. Because even in a future where energy is cheap and plentiful, efficiency still matters. Every watt by a vehicle like Aptera is a watt that can power a home, reduce grid strain, accelerate renewable transition elsewhere. And there's another assumption hidden in the argument that solar will always be abundant where and when it's needed. But the grid really doesn't work like that. Even with surplus solar at noon, there's no guarantee every car will be parked near a charger at that exact moment. Aptera isn't about scarcity, it's about wisdom. It's about designing for uncertainty and thriving in it, treating energy as precious, not because we have to, but because we can. What would an ultra high efficiency vehicle like an Aptera become if battery tech keeps improving at this rate?
Unnecessary. Yeah, it's a good point. You raise a really good point, because I love the Aptera car. I drove one of them. They're great. And I really want them to succeed. I think they're a fantastic company, but ultimately that concept makes sense if batteries are expensive. If they're not, doesn't really. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then if batteries are so cheap, right? Does solar powered vehicle like Aptera represent something to you, or you're just like, we don't even need to put solar on a car anymore?
No, you're right. And their solar panels, what the work they've done on them is incredible. I mean, the fact that they've come up there with their own chemistry to enable those panels to be thin and to be flexible, and it's amazing what they've done. But unfortunately, the truth is they're going to use solar paint. Companies will just simply use solar paint if it's used. I'm not sure it's necessary, but I mean, if it's very, very cheap, which I think it eventually will be, obviously Mercedes-Benz is using that solar paint. I think that would be really the best solution because it's extremely lightweight, thin. It's easily applied, really, really easily applied. So that's what I see happening in the future. I think cars will have solar paint, like a solar thin film PV applied to the outside of the car. But the Aptera concept is great, but it's a little bit too labor intensive and expensive. And I don't think that's the future, but I love what they've done though. I hope it works.
The truth is, the future won't be won by averages. It will be shaped by edge cases, by technologies that outperform when conditions aren't ideal. Sam returns to the question of efficiency and scale, doubling down on the idea that most vehicles don't need to be hyper efficient. And he is right. Most won't be, but some should be, because every system needs a leading edge. Hyper efficient vehicles aren't meant to replace every car on the road. It's meant to push the boundary of what's possible so that others can follow, adapt, and learn. This is the Formula One of energy efficiency. Like racing tech that eventually becomes standard braking systems, aerodynamics, even hybrid drivetrains. Vehicles like Aptera show us where design can go, and from there, it can trickle down. Innovation doesn't always look mainstream, and sometimes it looks like a wedge. I love coming up to a challenge like this. You're saying, hey, battery tech's going to go down, it's going to go cheaper, but that doesn't mean that grid infrastructure across country is going to improve to allow charging of all of these vehicles, like where everyone is currently living.
Well, if you think about it, anywhere we have a lot of solar, we also waste a lot of power. We waste a huge amount of power because of the duck curve, the solar duck curve. We create all this power in the middle of the day when people aren't using it, and then it simply gets curtailed. And for people who don't know what that means, they just basically get rid of it. So really, if you think about vehicle to grid, and you guys are starting to utilize that in the United States, vehicle to grid potentially is this, I think it's part of the solution. People having their own, people being essentially off grid. I mean, you're still on grid, but you're not really using the grid. And I think that a lot of experts think that's where we're headed. If people have their own solar and they're not wasting that solar, actually using it, and whether that goes into their car or into their home battery, then they won't potentially need to actually take all this extra power from the grid. What they can do though is put power into the grid. So the average person, say for example me, I consume far less power than I actually produce. Would consume probably on average 35% of my power is what I actually consume. So there is, in Australia, there's 4 million households. We have about 11 million households and 4 million of them have solar. So now we have this battery. I think of the 4 million households with solar, I think about 350,000 have batteries. So only a small percentage. But now the government has essentially subsidizing it to reduce the price by around 50%, meaning you can get a home battery now for literally about $5,000 US. It's a no-brainer, right? What you're doing is for the 3.5 million households that don't have a battery, you're making a battery so cheap, you're making the ability for them to produce their own power and be energy self-sufficient, cost them almost nothing. And that's a result of really cheap Chinese batteries have enabled that. I mean, if batteries were 50 grand, 40 grand, then that wouldn't be possible. But because of the decline in the constant decline in the cost of batteries, so that's going to continue to happen. With solar, the cost of solar will continue to fall. The cost of batteries continues to fall. And then what happens is governments say, well, this is the solution. We don't need to build a fucking nuclear power plant because it's just insane. We can just enable people to create their own power. And then that's our solution. We don't need all this grid infrastructure. We're spending billions of dollars on this infrastructure. We actually don't need it. All we need to do is provide people with the ability to create their own power.
What makes this conversation so rare is the tone, measured, optimistic, and grounded in lived experiences. But optimism isn't the absence of problems, it's the refusal to stop at them. As the conversation continues, I bring in the American context, highlighting the friction between ambition and reality. Sam listens, then builds. What follows isn't a rebuttal, but a reframing. Because the future of clean energy won't be solved by one country's policy or one breakthrough battery. battery. It's a system problem and it demands a systems mindset. This moment reminds us optimism doesn't ignore the grid, it interrogates it. I love your practical and optimistic outlook on this type of thing. Some of the challenges we receive here in the States is like right now, like when we go to put solar on our house, like the guy selling the solar, because I've had lots of quotes come out, they will cap it at what they think my energy usage will be. So they won't allow me to produce more than what I could push back into the grid, because the electric company is like, if you're going to do that, you either have to be severed from us and you can't participate on our network of cables. So, because essentially you're taking a bite of their sandwich and they're saying, hey, we like everything we have currently. And so that's one of the things we fight against in terms of going.
What happens when the United States sees almost all of the Western world doing that except them? It kind of makes them look like they're in the dark ages, right?
It does. It does. But, we haven't gotten there on healthcare yet either. So it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's just the reality. In this next exchange, the focus tightens around pressure points, energy policy, global economics, and the hard math behind clean infrastructure. Sam doesn't sugarcoat it. Without affordable, scalable battery technologies, the US can't remain competitive. And I drill into the real-world implications of how pricing, investment, and regulation shape innovation as much as chemistry ever could. This is the edge of the conversation where the belief meets bottom line, and the stakes could not be higher.
I think it will, because if you even though you're trying to block Chinese batteries and Chinese solar, there's still the critical mass point where you double the amount of production, and it will contribute to continual cost declines. So even though, you've still got all these battery factories, if you look at all the battery factories in the United States, put them all together, all the planned ones, and you can look at their output, it's far more than, imagine if every car in the United States, let's assume they were all EVs. Every single one of them, it's all 16 million every year. So you're selling about 16 million cars a year. If by 2030, you said, okay, all 16 million cars, we need enough batteries for every single one of them, you would still have 60% left over. There is so many battery factories being planned. Now the Trump administration could cancel this, but there are so many that, when I last checked, you had massive overcapacity. And if you're building out that many batteries, and if that does happen, the cost for those batteries will decline enormously because of the scale. And then I think that might encourage this whole energy storage market. Plus, remember, if people have an EV, they want to be, and they have vehicle to grid capacity, right? We know Teslas have them inbuilt in them. We've tested it here in Australia. Teslas are capable of it. In fact, pretty much all EVs, if you use SIG Energy's battery system, you can use DC charging on your EV at home, DC to DC, and you can charge your EV at up to 22 kilowatt at home. If you've got an EV and you've got a massive battery, why would you want to use the grid? Why would you want to pay when you don't have to? Why would you not want to use solar to charge it and then be able to power your own house off a 120 kilowatt pickup truck battery?
I hear what you're saying, and it makes logical sense. I think what's going to click for the US, or when it's going to click, is the price of energy per watt to the actual entire grid is what's going to have to drive all of that battery storage and that requirement to go into battery tech. Behind every battery innovation is a supply chain. Behind every supply chain is a geopolitical reality. In this segment, Sam and I touch on something rarely discussed in tech optimism: the uneven cost of energy and labor. While breakthroughs might happen globally, their adoption is shaped by where they're built, who builds them, and how nations manage their energy futures. Because innovation doesn't just compete on merit, it competes on margin, because we can't compete globally if our price per watt of energy is higher, especially at the age of AI, when all these different computer systems are demanding so much electricity.
Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge for you, because your solar is so much more expensive than outside of the US. If you get a solar system, if I want to get my system installed here, I priced it up in the US, it was triple the price.
I know. I know. I've been looking at it. I'm like, well, do I just get up on the roof and order these things in and figure this out on my own? And and it's a little scary, like how much cheaper things can be other places. For those of you that made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, so it shows up on your feed. I'm going to keep making this stuff so I can assign it for homework. So don't worry about that part.